Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we will be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler. If you want to hear our review for Parable of the Sower, go check that out. We already posted it a couple of weeks, maybe a month ago, so that's already posted. This is the second book, just letting you know. If you want to see more content from us outside the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter at LitLibPodcast. I'm your co-host Mariah, and you can find me at Hungry Rye on all social media platforms.
And I'm your co-host, Kristen. You can find me at TensTBR on all social media platforms.
We are also fundraising for the Northern Gaza Water Fund, so go check out the link below. If you can donate, that would be real sick.
So now this is the second in a series, so more than likely this will already be spoiling the first book, at least within the first half of this. And then we can get into specific spoilers for this book. But personally, I would say if you like the first one, you probably should read this one because obviously it's a continuation of the story. It's a completion of the story. And I feel like Mariah and I also have this more controversial take too as well, where even if you didn't read the first one, you could probably just read this one as well without having to read the first one.
Yeah, I would argue that this one is more important, and I think it's a more balanced read all around, so I would recommend this one. If anything, if you're going to decide between the two and you're like, oh, I'm only going to read one for whatever reason, pick this one. But read them both. I think they're both very important pieces of literature. And we'll get into like our personal criticisms and maybe follow up on some of the criticisms that we had in the first one to see if they were resolved. And this one for both of us, Kristen and I have not talked to each other really
Not
since
really,
we
no.
finished it. So this is all fresh. You're catching this right as it's happening, our thoughts and feelings. If you want to know more about the author, all of that is in the first episode too. We're not going to really rehash it. She has passed away. She's no longer living. This book was, or not this book, but this Earthseed was supposed to be a trilogy, and it's not because she never finished it, which is quite sad. And maybe we can get into what exactly the third book would be later on, and because I don't want to spoil anything right now. So
Yes.
if you were wondering, we both rated it pretty decently. I did like this more than the previous one. I think I gave the first one a 4.25, and I think this is a 4.5. It's a soft 5-star.
So I had the same exact ratings for both of them, so. But I know Mariah did you end up changing your rating of the first one after reading this one?
No, I don't know. I haven't.
Because that was
I've
something
dabbled
we
with
discussed
lowering it a little bit. I don't know. I originally, I think I thought I had rated it a little bit higher than I did, and I think it's fine the way it is.
I mean, they're very
maybe
close.
as we go through this, they're close,
and
I prefer this one.
Because we also did not read this back to back, and I think I would have rated this one lower if I did end up reading it back to back, because there is a lot of, I wouldn't want to say like repetitiveness or like a rehashing, because I feel like that's kind of negative, but I would say there is a lot of refreshers within this book where you could definitely read like the first one and sit with that for like months and then read the second one, and you won't, all the important information will be restated to you if you don't necessarily recall every minute plot point from the first book.
Yes, this one is a lot more topical too, so I think, I don't know why I always see people talk about the first one and nobody really talks about this one. This one, I feel like is way more
points that
worthy.
Everyone mentions, because I feel like everyone mentions a lot of the stuff about like the first one, like, oh, there's a president running on Make America Great. It's big on the climate change stuff, and I feel like that stuff ends up actually getting focused more on the second book than it does in the first book. The first book is more of just a journey for Lauren and all of the other people and what society is like before like this big inevitable crash that kind of happens. Because even like the pandemic or whatever, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's not even really mentioned in the first book either. Like,
no, not at all. And I don't know if it's yeah,
like
because we do have a time jump.
Yes.
So I don't know if they just learn more about the world as they're going, whereas the first one's a little bit more survivally. And again, most of this is going to be spoilers. I'm warning
especially
you.
For the
I know
first
we're
one,
early into it, but this is just like, there's no way of doing this without it. So
Yeah. Well, because I do think this one is more well-rounded as well because we are getting more perspectives. We're getting Lauren's perspective, which is the shaper, or Olamina. Is that how you say it? I don't know. I didn't listen to the audiobook like Mariah did.
Yeah, I think it's just Olamina.
Olamina, which is our main characters, and then we have some writings from, I know I'm gonna say this wrong because I did not listen to the audiobook, but
Ooh, Bankole.
yeah, Benkole is another perspective that we end up getting. We also get Mark, which is spoiler, uh another character. And then also we get Lauren's daughter's perspective. So we get four different like writings and perspectives throughout this book, which does, I think, make this book more well-rounded because we're getting a lot more differing perspectives than we would if we were just, again, only getting Lauren's readings like the first book was.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be set up entirely like diary entries, like the first one, where it's a chronological order of things. And I thought it was really nice and refreshing and much more engaging
Mm-hmm.
than the first one, the way it was set up with this. And I enjoyed it more. And I think I don't want to get too far ahead. It seems like other people enjoy it a lot more too, because I think this one, I don't know if it has higher or lower ratings than the other one, but it still has a 4.32 star average with like 84,000
So it
ratings
does have a higher
and
rating because the first
almost
one's at
9,000. Yeah,
4.2 whenever we recorded
that's
the
what I
last one.
thought. So overall, higher read tends to happen though with people that read a second book in a series because you already read the first one, so you likely
Already
enjoyed
enjoy the
enough to pick up the second
characters,
one.
enjoy the world building, whatever it is, have you. So I think that is. And what's kind of funny too, not to like harp on it, but we did get our first hate comment on the first episode of this too.
I know. That's I we very seldom get hate comments, especially on the Spotify. And I thought that was quite funny to see that today
Yeah, whenever
or
we're like
yesterday.
planning on recording this episode today, we literally like just get a hate comment like the day of.
Mind you, somebody with a Harry Potter
Yeah, they
username.
I looked up their username and it's like Harry Potter, like deep Harry Potter lore too. So I was like, "Oh, okay." But I do think like this book is very topical and obviously like again, it is so crazy the fact that Octavia Butler wrote this story in the 90s, which obviously we talked about too. And I think this is one thing too, because you did make a video about this book earlier too, where we were just like, wow, it's so crazy that this happens. Then everyone's like, actually, this is like a Reagan thing originally. It's like, yes, we understand that, but it is just very refreshing to see. I would say like Octavia Butler is like, although it's not technically like contemporary, I do feel like it is very contemporary because it's like the 90s, pretty modern, to even be able to see like how late stage capitalism affects like regular people. I feel like that's like a big like topic of this book, and I think it ends up falling into that problem too though that the Hunger Game does, where it almost falls more into populism as well, without like clear there's no mention of capitalism within this book, I don't think. Or if it is, it's like very.
I don't think she does. It is mentioned, like fascism is mentioned, which
Yes.
I was very surprised, but it is only mentioned like once, I
Mm-hmm.
think. Um, which that was, I'm glad that she did that, but it is interesting that she didn't talk about the economic system. It's kind of just told and like reflected upon different things that happened in like like the 1960s and the 1980s or whatever, because like this is supposed to be set so far in the future. Um, I thought that was interesting. I wish she would have. That
Yes.
would have been really cool. But she did not. And I don't know. I think that's part of like some of my criticisms with this book is I don't know how to structure my review because I've been thinking a lot, mainly like the religious element of this
Mm-hmm.
book. I don't really fuck with it.
Well,
I didn't like
because
it.
I'm assuming, like, again, Mariah is somebody that grew up very religious. I went to church a bit, but not enough for me to have really retained a lot of the knowledge and stuff, like, religiously. And obviously, there is, like, a critique on religion, but I don't feel like it's very strong, like, very strongly done. Like, I feel like that's one of the weakest aspects, which is kind of hard too, because I feel like this book does focus on like Christian like fundamentalism and Christian nationalism. You know, like it says a lot
Yes.
about it without like really saying anything about it, I feel.
Yes, whereas opposed to like one of the books that we have read and reviewed recently, which is After the Revolution by Robert Evans, is very like explicitly Christofascism that's stated. This I think is much more like you can see the connections between real
Mm-hmm.
life. I can see somebody picking this up and maybe who doesn't have any sort of like class consciousness or understanding of politics and like make connections to like what you're seeing in the real world and be like, oh my god, this book came out in like 2001 and it's very similar to like things that are happening now, and maybe it would encourage somebody to learn more. I think like the religious element of Earthseed that kind of, I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me is the idea of treating this kind of like liberatory idea as like a religion. And I do know that
Yes.
like liberation theology exists. However, with any sort of belief system, there, in my opinion, tends to be some sort of dogma that can associate with it. So I think that's kind of like where I'm like, okay, you have this and you have these principles that you're like very strictly adhering to, and you kind of see it towards the end of the book. Like people are like quoting these lines and saying, like, okay, this is, I don't know. It was
It
very
I
strange. I
think
don't like how it was tied to
I
a
think
religious belief system.
I think our problem is too because we are like scientific socialists in that way too, where this gives the very utopian ideals. I feel like obviously throughout this novel and stuff, like we have um Lauren going through and trying to spread her knowledge of Earthseed, which is a very like, I mean, like it has beliefs and stuff, but I feel like the beliefs are not very clear. Like it's not like communism, we're having communism sort of thing, or even like that. It's just more like change is a necessary thing, and what we're doing in the world is what God is change. Change will happen inevitably. The best thing we can do in the world is work with each other and work and do what's best for the people around you and stuff. And I do think that's a very nice like moral to have, and a very like inspiring thing to have and to spread. And I don't necessarily like, I don't disagree with that in any way, shape, or form, but I just think the lack of like economic focus on it, and even like obviously like racism and like the patriarchy is somewhat touched on it. I just don't feel like those like critiques or like commentaries are strong throughout this.
Especially since everything is so overtly stated, which like with like the Earthseed whatnot, like I think you can make a good case for how like Octavia Butler is talking about like historical and dialectical materialism, like things change and you have to adapt
Mm-hmm.
to your environment. But then there's also this element of like escapism to a different planet. And also like forming these kind of autonomous communes where everything's horizontally run. Again, that's fine, but there's nothing really talking about like what's going on with the masses and how they're like rising up to stop it. It's kind of like people are doing things on their own. And I don't know, maybe if I missed something, but I didn't see that.
That's what I think too. And like I do know that like throughout the book, that was something that was incredibly frustrating to me. Is that while like we have like Jarrett running on a Make America Great Again, and there is like, I don't remember the guy's name, but there is like another guy running against him that's kind of like Biden esque, where he's just seen as like incompetent and stupid and like not fully aware of what's going on, which is very similar to like the 2020 election and things like that. But I think like one thing, like they acted like, I felt like even like Lauren and like all of the people like within Acorn, they acted as if the other guy getting elected would have been better, like significantly better for them, and like made like a big like change, whenever we could see that the government that they were under before even Jarrett was running for president or anything like that, like the government that was in control, which we're assuming is just supposed to be like standard, like regular American, like our current government system, they were still like horrific things happening, and her community was still being attacked, like in Rodeo in the 2020s and stuff like that. Like her community was still attacked, and there's still so much death and violence and rape and so much of that, where acting as if this one president being introduced is changing that to the extremes, where I to me it doesn't seem like anything was different necessarily. They just had like somebody to rally behind instead of just doing it for fun or whatever they were claiming that the people were doing it for.
Yeah, that was like the confusing part going from the previous book to this one is it seems like you're already there. Like
Yes.
beyond that, like you have these like super armed Walmarts, and the police aren't like doing anything. They're just like kind of letting crime go, but also like not. But somehow it does get worse. But there's also like where she lived, like there was people just being like killed in the streets and like nothing happening. It's
Yes.
really odd. I don't see how.
So like this one president just ended up changing everything. This one president like getting elected and changing like all of the policies and stuff whenever nothing was really changed. And that's like one thing that I think is like incredibly frustrating about like liberals versus Republicans, or like Democrats versus Republicans, specifically like within like the American mindset and stuff. Like under Biden, we were still living under like terrible regime changes. I mean, Biden passed some of the most anti-LGBTQIA plus laws. And like certain things were not codified that should have been codified if the Democrats actually cared about the people, where we wouldn't be in like the place that we are under Trump's presidency. And we can see that like even under a liberal president versus under a conservative president, we are still seeing like the ills of capitalism are still affecting us significantly. And so I do think like obviously everything is worse under Trump. Like obviously like things are more intense under Trump and stuff like that. But then you also can't look at like under Barack Obama, like ICE raids were just as bad, if not worse, under Obama, you know? But they weren't sensationalized. And that's the
Yes,
difference,
I
I
think you
think.
can also see like with the way like Barack Obama with like Syria and like all of his missile strikes, like
Killed like
he's earned
yes,
like so
so
many things.
many
Like he's a
people.
terrible war criminal, but people kind of just prop him up as being like this incredibly progressive president that we had. And it's like his campaign was,
Yes.
but the
He didn't
actuality
follow
was
through
not
and
that case. And even like the other guy that was running against Jarrett in this, it wasn't even like I thought maybe it would be more like a Bernie or something, like something more substantial. But the way it's tried to, I don't know, it kind of played into the idea that if somebody would have elected somebody else, it could make better material conditions so that you could organize under them. But the way that like the voting and stuff worked in this, it didn't really make any sense.
no, because they also had
Respectfully,
like
couldn't follow it in a way that I could connect to meaningfully unless you talk about like gerrymandering. And I think there was like elements where they talked about like literacy. Like there's a literacy crisis in this
mm,
with the education system, but it's not like the fixation is on Earthseed and like Lauren getting like her acorn all situated, and then like the re-education camp that like ends up becoming of acorn. And I think it kind of distracts away from like the bigger picture stuff. But then when it is trickled in, I just felt so confused as a Marxist reading it. I know other
yes.
people may not, but I just couldn't make a materialist
Which
connection to it where
again
I
like
was like, okay, I can get that.
which I think again too like obviously like this is a dystopian novel, but I do feel like some of the things were like obviously shocking and so extreme and stuff. And I think it's really interesting too that we have to like put it in like a 21st century mindset where they're talking about like, oh, slavery, it's happening here in the United States, whenever we already know that like there are more people in slavery now than there were back in the day too, just in other countries and other parts of the world. And not even mentioning what's going on here in America where we have sweatshops and stuff like that. And it's just really interesting to me that like this is just like, oh, this is a new reality, whenever in reality it's not necessarily new either, if it's
Maybe
based off the real
Octavia
world.
Butler is just trying to like meet people where they're at and like get them to make the connections rather than like make the assertion. I like to think that maybe
Yes,
that's what's going
I
on. I
hope so
haven't
as
read
well.
the other books. I have heard Dawn is really good, and I'm very curious how the rest of her books and her
I have
politics kind of
Fledgling
develop.
on my TBR. I think I have it actually. But yeah, I do think I don't know because I don't know much about like any of her other books like politically, you know. But I thought it was weird too because I think there's a lot of demonization of Lauren that is done throughout these books, not only from the perspective of her daughter, but even from like some of
Bankole.
Bancole's writings as well. That I feel like they're always like acting like Lauren is so naive and so like confused and stuff. When I do think she has very strong principles and very strong ideas that I don't disagree with either. But I think it's really interesting how that is portrayed throughout the book as well. And even
She's very driven, which I appreciate. But she also has like her flaws. Like she's a very complex character, and I'm glad that this book exists to kind of clarify some of the things and like why she acts the way she does or like her plans for the future. I think it makes a lot more sense.
mm-hmm,
Um but it is maybe like the point of like having those in there was to like challenge her ideals, but
yeah,
then also kind of see like where those characters ended up, because then we get later on like with Mark becoming
yes,
this like religious zealot for the
while also
CA.
being queer,
And then yes, it was very strange to
yes.
see, to say the least.
Well,
I thought it
because
was, I don't know, there is this book series is hard. I was reading through some of the reviews and people were talking about like the conservatism that is kind of present in this, and I don't know what they mean. I don't know if they mean
I
like
think
her ideals or
I think it's because a lot of the time I noticed this, which I don't necessarily, this was actually something that I think was very positive and stuff, was that I think Lauren would rationalize a lot of Jarrett's supporters and where she could understand and see where they're coming from and understand why people voted for Jarrett. And I can see why that would upset some liberals and stuff, where they have this idea that every single Trump supporter and every single right winger is just a very hateful and evil person, where that's not necessarily where I think Lauren does have that understanding that a lot of people are actually just, there's an education problem mainly in like their society. And so I think she'll end up there. I highlighted a couple of quotes and stuff throughout where she kind of rationalizes, where it's like, oh, they voted for this because they wanted him to like protect them in some type of way. They view like how like, and it's very similar to how like Trump got elected. Like these are very charismatic leaders that they're the ones that are giving you solutions to your problems. They're not the right solutions, nor are they any powerful solutions, but they are giving you solutions and someone to blame it on, where you're like, oh, if you don't have like a surrounding understanding of like the world and capitalism and things like that, these people saying pretty words in your ear is going to convince you, you know?
yeah, and like that's what kind of like led Trump to win his second election, in my opinion. Like Kamala Harris and like the DNC in general just weren't running on a good platform. Like they are so determined to run on this like moderate democratic policies. Like we can't move too far left. We don't want to alienate potential moderate Republicans from coming over to our side. And there's just like no charisma. They're just like Trump supporters are bad. It's like, but the people like working class people don't, they just want things to be better for them. And Donald Trump is very like, I'm gonna make gas cheaper, eggs are gonna go down. Like he's just like saying things,
Yeah,
like
and
he's
that's what
just
the
saying
people
things.
want
And you
though.
know the crazy thing is he's also just like doing things as well, which I
Mhm.
don't know if anyone else has been thinking about this, but I was looking at it, I was like, wow, like look at all the stuff Biden could have done if he just decided to say like fuck it and just started making things
But
happen.
he doesn't, they
Like
don't
he
care.
could just
Yeah.
sign things. They could just be doing this because it's like, oh, they can't do it. It's illegal, which I thought was really nice in this because she talks about like a whole I think, and maybe it's in one of the daughter's passages where she's talking about like, oh, the legality of like stealing these children. They're like, actually it is kind of like legal. There's like doing it within their like legal rights. And I do think it kind of relates to like what we're seeing now is like a lot of stuff that like the Republicans are doing that the Democrats hate. Like they're kind of doing things legally. Like it's all within their
That's what
abilities and powers. And I wish they would make that connection instead
I
of just being like, nah, shit,
yeah.
conservatism in the book.
Exactly. Well, because I think that's one thing too that was also ended up kind of frustrating me throughout this, because whenever like Acorn was taken and stuff like that, and then it became like borderline like a concentration camp for like a slave camp for these people of Acorn, where they were just like, oh, well, this can't be legal, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, even if it's like legal, that doesn't make it okay to do. And I think that's something that this book kind of tries to like, it's not enough, like there is like criticism of like certain things, but I don't think it goes far enough for like why it's not a perfect 5-star for us, you know? Like it doesn't go all the way, because there is like those things where they're like, well, I have no idea if this is legal, but this can't be legal, where it's like, okay, but it does, legalizing it doesn't make it okay. Like there's been plenty of stuff that has been legal in the United States specifically that is not okay to do, and just because it's legal doesn't make it okay, you know? And I think that's one thing that
Yeah,
this
I
book
do.
kind of got hung up
That's
on.
like the things like liberals, though, is they get hung up on like the legality of things.
Yes.
And it's like, maybe you shouldn't respect like
The law is
an
not.
empire that was built on
Yeah.
settler colonialism and genocide, and like whether or not they think it's like legal. The Constitution, who wrote the Constitution?
Yeah. No,
Like
literally,
they
like white
weren't
slave
like good
owners.
people.
Like that's one thing that, and
I
I
rest
think
my
this book
case.
does have a little bit of flaws within that, because I do think that was brought up quite a bit. But then there's also this quote right here, and it's like, the religious poor who are ignorant, frightened, and desperate to improve their situations are glad to see a man of God in the White House. And that's what he is to them, a man of God. Even some of the less religious ones support him. They say the country needs a strong hand to bring back order, good jobs, honest cops, and free schools. I mean, obviously that's not what Donald Trump ran on. We're not in such an extreme dystopia that this novel is a one-to-one comparison of what it's like in the United States. But again, that is like similar to what Trump runs on, is I want to make life more affordable for the average American, and average Americans see that, and they don't, and they see Biden or Kamala just being like, I'm going to do what Donald Trump does but better. And then like they don't even see, like they don't respout any of those words. It's like, because they're capable of lying, but they're incapable of telling the lies people want to hear.
It's embarrassing.
It really,
Honestly,
like, it
like just
sucks.
be better, lie a little bit better, have some sort of
Like,
like
if you really want
charisma.
to win,
I
just
don't know.
lie. Like, I mean, people already know. Like, every time you talk to someone, they literally are like, every politician lies, blah blah blah, and like, it's just about who's telling the better lies that somebody wants to hear. You know, because
It
we
kind of
know,
like,
and I think that's why we're so like disillusioned with voting and everything. Like, obviously, we still vote, guys. Do not put us up on pyres or whatever you do. We still vote, and I definitely support people going to vote, especially in your local communities and things like that. That is actually where you can make the most difference. But like, we still vote for president and things like that. But I think that's genuinely what the presidential election comes down to, is who's telling the better lies.
I think Kamala Harris's 107 Days, as much as I talk about it every time we film, because there's just so much in it. Like, she had a whole section where the reason why she picked Tim Walz, right, is because
Mm-hmm.
she wanted Pete Buttigieg,
Booty
but it was
jig,
too big of a risk. Buttigieg, I don't know how to say his name, because
because
he's
he's
a
gay.
gay Jewish man. That was too big of a risk.
So then
And I was like,
so they don't even care.
what? I mean, at least if she would have had that, I feel like she would have been a lot more likable than just having some random old white man, seemingly random. Like, I honestly, I had not heard of Tim Walz until this
Me
election.
neither. Because what
I
is
didn't
he,
know who
like, the
he was.
Minnesota governor or something like
Yeah,
that?
he's just a guy.
I mean, I
And
know
it's just like,
obviously
yeah,
he's probably
I'm
big in
gonna go
like
with him.
Democrats. I don't even, but I don't even think that like, that's one thing too, like with the whole like identity politics of it all within like the American like government and like running and stuff, is that like a lot of,
And we're very specifically talking about neoliberalism
yes,
weaponizing identity politics. Please check
yes,
out the book Elite
like
Capture,
capture,
because we need to
yeah,
be very nuanced when we talk about it. Because some people be like, "Oh my God, they're anti-identity." I'm like, no,
no,
no. But it's like
but
in the
it's
same
like
way, like
using that,
Amy Coney Barrett being in like the Supreme Court is not like a win for feminism. You know what I mean?
yes, like, and that's one thing that I
There.
think like a
Sorry,
lot of
I needed to
liberals,
add a
no,
disclaimer.
exactly, but that's the thing that a lot of like liberals and stuff do, like just because like Kamala is a black woman that we should vote for her, where it's like, I don't support her stance on genocide, like I'm not going to support that personally, you know, like you have to have morals, because if you stand for if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything, you know.
She was like commander-in-chief, or not commander-in-chief, but,
Vice
like, the second
president. Yeah.
vice president. It's, I honestly, I feel like she had a lot more pull than she leads on, just based on, like, the way Biden was. I feel like she was doing a lot
The
more
problem
behind
was
the
is
scenes. That's
that
my whole thing.
I think a lot of it too is that she didn't distance herself from Biden. I mean, obviously, I do think that like Biden should not have been like running for re-election, and honestly, if they were going to prop her up, they should have done it sooner. But I think the reason why the Democrat did that is because they didn't want even someone like remotely on the left winning, like Bernie Sanders, because I think he would have. I think he would have actually done something within the like DNC. Like I think he could have actually won like the Democratic nominee, and like liberals, as much as they hate like fascism, they definitely hate even the idea of socialism more. Not that I think Bernie Sanders either would have fixed any of our scenarios or anything, but I do think it could have done definitely something more than Biden or Kamala could have done, That's like my idea where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, yeah, you guys want me to vote for blue no matter who, but like my most likely, not even like very strongly either, would be like a Bernie Sanders, Like that's where you can kind of
Just, like, a
understand even
general
yeah.
run-of-the-mill, like, progressive
Like that's somebody that
whatever. But
genuinely
that wasn't
has
even what was president here, and
no.
that's, like, the whole thing. And I know people are probably expecting us to talk about, like, maybe character dynamics and evolution in, like, throughout the story, and how, like, things change. But I was thinking about this stuff in the background
Yeah.
because it is relevant
I think
to the
because
way that Earthseed was able to spread, and then also, like, what Lauren is able to build after she gets out. And I
if you
still
think
don't
about it,
really
we're
get
actually
it.
spreading our own OFC right now with the podcast.
It's
I just think
yeah.
I think it almost feels like too optimistic as well, because there remotely is no organization. Again, we're Marxist Leninist guys, so like don't the taking allegations. We're never defeating them. The idea that like because the ending is just it leaves me incredibly unsatisfied as well, because they're just like, well, they raised enough money, they got enough rich people to donate to them, and now they're rich now, and now they can colonize space.
That was really weird because I think it's in the very beginning of this, right, where I think it's Lauren and Bankel. I don't know. They're talking about like how it's going to happen, and she's like, "It doesn't matter. We're just going to get some rich person is going to want to invest in it and make money, and that's how we're going to get it accomplished." I can't remember where it was at. I remember her having a conversation talking about like how it was going to get funded, like them going to space, and I do think her daughter had a really good take on it because she's like, "How can you not care about the people here?"
Yes, I know that happened in the ending as well. Towards the end, there was something where she's like, oh, she's sending her people off to the stars while we're still suffering here on Earth. And I think that almost like reminds me like why people don't like liberals either. Like, not saying that I necessarily think like Earthsiege in itself is an entirely liberal thing. Again, this is like let's dunk on liberals episode. But I do think that this is something very similar where it's like the idea that we want to just start fresh or something whenever like changing. I think that's like one good thing, because like I do think this book kind of ends up focusing a lot on like mutual aid as well, and like helping your fellow neighbors and stuff like that, and that's one big way to convert them. And I know that's an anarchist idea, whoa, sue me, but I do think that's a good idea for building like class consciousness, and I know Mariah agrees with that as well. But I do think that this acts like it's just like, okay, we help everyone out, and then everyone's going to be content with our ideas, and we can just spread them like it's a flower, like we're pollinating the earth with it. And I think that's incredibly unrealistic, to be honest.
No, because anyone that's like, yeah, like you have to like talk to people and like build up their trust, and I can't imagine how bad it is here. But then like in the book, it seems like it's just like so quick. Like she just like slips in a couple verses from Earthseed, and they're like, "Yo, that's kind of good." And
Absolute
I don't
cinema.
know. Mainly, I don't know. Just in my experience, that just hasn't been the case. Like, yeah, I can have like conversations with people,
Mm-hmm.
but also
It's not
I don't
fixing
know.
the
It's
world in
different.
any way,
It's
shape, or form. That's one thing
yeah.
too.
I don't know. That's like the whole thing.
This
It's
is
like,
why we need
yes,
an
like we want to
organized
build
vanguard party.
solidarity, but there is no like organized. Well, there was some mention of like a revolution or a rebellion, a failed rebellion that happened at some point, but it doesn't get into it. And I just wanted more of that because these books are more like a drama. And I don't know if you were going into this expecting that, but like these are very much more like drama, apocalyptic, survival type books. Whereas I thought it was going to be a little bit more like politically driven rather than
Yes, I agree.
a character and kind of just experiencing things. Just the way that people talk about them. They talk about them like she's Katniss Everdeen or something. I don't know. Like I that's what I was expecting. Some Hunger Games
Yeah.
kind of stuff, like where somebody's going to like revolt against the government, and it's kind of just getting this. It's almost like literary fiction in some ways.
Yes, like a dystopian lit fic. Well, because
Yeah, like we're getting an analysis of her character and like how she exists under these conditions and why she is the way she is and like what she wants in the world and how she's gonna do it no matter what. Like she's determined to make it happen.
yeah, so
So in that way, it is interesting, but it's very it's strange. I feel so bad because I know people really really love this, and I did. I really
I
liked
liked
it, but
it.
there's still so many things that I have been wanting to talk about that like confused me.
Well, because this is the quote too that I think is really like relevant because it says this is from her daughter's perspective, where it says, "But to tell the truth, the more I read about Earthseed, the more I despise it. So much has needed to be done here on Earth. So many diseases, so much hunger, so much poverty, so much suffering. And here was a rich organization spending vast sums of money, time, and effort on nonsense, just nonsense, which is them funding like their space program to go live in space. And like that's one thing that like." Not to harp on our hate comic again, but they were talking about like the idea that like moving to space is supposed to be this whole brand new thing. And it's like, again, like if the same people, like if capitalism is still in space, I don't want to be in space, you know? Like it's not going to do anything for anybody. It's just going to end up causing the same inequalities that we have now, if not worse, because it's another place to do it at.
See, and this is where I would have loved a third book because I was looking into what exactly, like, how many books it was supposed to be and, like,
Yes.
what exactly the next one was going to be. Apparently, it was supposed to be called The Parable of the Trickster, and it was supposed to be about them building a new society on another planet. But upon her death, people, I can't remember who exactly was going through all of the manuscripts and stuff. She had a ton of stuff, and she would start the book, couldn't finish the book, would write pages, couldn't make it happen. Like she had really bad writer's block. So there's just like nothing to go off of. Which I think it would have been interesting to see what exactly it would have looked like. Because in my head, the first book is it almost felt like she
Prequel.
was kind of appealing to like populism, like the right wingers, and this
Mm-hmm.
one was a lot more like radical. And maybe the third one, if she's just gonna full send, and she's like, "How do I make this happen?"
Like
And it
if it
was
was
gonna be
full
an
communist.
absolute like 6-star read, yeah. And he's like, "Look, we could have this, and you don't even need to go to Mars. You could just do this here." That would have been really cool, but like a dispossessed
That's kind of what I
type
would get,
book.
is that it would kind of be more like the Dispossessed if there was a third book. Not necessarily saying that I love the Dispossessed. I do appreciate like the politics and like the way the government was ran in like the Dispossessed, but I also just didn't care for like the characters in that novel. We did a full episode on that book if you want our full thoughts and reviews on that. That's kind of what I imagine the world to be like, which again is incredibly frustrating to me as like a person, because I just don't understand, like we're supposed to like have this humanity, and it's just like, well, I was able to get on a ship and go live at a better place because I was born here versus you being born in the United States. Sorry, you're an L and you're stuck where you are, you know? And it ends up having the same faults of capitalism without like a global need of liberation, you know?
Yeah, it feels a little. I know it's supposed to be optimistic. I bet read some anarchist article that I sent to Kristen
Yeah.
where they were talking about how like a lot of the stuff in Earthseed was very in a line with anarchist principles because it's a very flexible ideology. It I can't remember exactly what they said. Let me see. This was Here was a quote. The internal theology of Earthseed also offers many lessons for and has many parallels to anarchist thought. For one, its emphasis on change aligns closely with the flexible and spontaneous nature of anarchism, which not only resists creating exact blueprints for some top-down program, but fights for liberation against reactionary and authoritarian forces that must necessarily use violence to enforce. However, and I think that's kind of the thing is like with anarchism and escapism, it's like you don't want to use that violent top down force. It's like you need a vanguard party to suppress fascists. That's the whole ticket.
Yeah, and
That's
reactionaries,
how
like
the Soviets
actually.
won World War II. That's how like the Chinese fought off like the fascists. Like there was a lot going on. Or Ho Chi Minh with the French imperialists that were backed by like the U.S. Um,
Yes.
the same thing happened in Laos. Like there, it takes you have to have organization if you want to combat it. And I do think this is just like escape to live in your own kind of commune type
I
of
mean, it's
book, and I
nice.
don't like it. It's nice. It's a nice thought, but I do feel like I don't know. If I told somebody to read this, I would also have to be like, okay, we need to read like Black Shirts and Reds by Michael Parenti as
Yeah.
well.
Well,
Like
because like I feel
let's chase this.
like these ideas, these small little combines are like like for our ideas, like where we believe in like the socialism, it's a transition from capitalism to communism and stuff. Well, this stuff that's being shown with like Acorn, I think that would be like our final like idea of like a society like way in the future. Like that's what I would want is more like small communes and that idea, you know. But I just don't like even I don't think it's realistic anytime now, or to even act like it really does something of substantial nature. Because I mean, there's been a couple like here in the United States. There was that one. Do you remember where it was? There was like that small little like anarchist community. They like held like a couple city blocks for like a month or something, and then it just
You're talking about
like
like Occupy Wall Street or
no, it wasn't that. It well, there that's kind of is an example of it, but then also there was one. It was like right during COVID in like 2020 and stuff. There was like a little
I think it's
area.
in Portland.
Yeah, that's what I
They
wanted to say.
they did some autonomous zone and they held it for a little bit. I don't
Yes.
know. I don't know.
But it's just like those things do not like it's a very temporary fix for a for a major problem, you know, where it's like putting a band-aid on like a stab wound. You know, like it's not really going to do anything. Like yeah, it might help close the wound a little bit and stop a little bit of the blood, but it's not going to be a big enough difference to actually make material changes for people versus having an organized revolution with a vanguard party would.
Yeah, and like this is to say, like I think these things should be happening like in tandem. I don't think
Yes.
it should just be like one or the other. Like you should be practicing these principles and lifting people up, educating them. And I
Yes.
really liked how they had like what was it like a year period before they started doing like you were fully integrated and had like decision making. You got
Mm-hmm.
profit sharing with like their business. I thought that was a really cool principle to make sure that people were a little bit more vetted and brought up to pace with like their ideology that they had. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really smart way to like do it to protect your community. Um, but you like these things need to be happening at the same time. They can't just
Yes.
it can't just be
It's
one
one or
way
the
or
other.
the other. And I don't want people to think that because like I'm not dogmatic, but there definitely is proof in the pudding for how fascists have been suppressed historically, and I just don't like the idea of positing it as like escapism. And then also I do remember there being something about how like he just ran out of popularity and people
That's why
just
he lost.
decided they
Yeah.
didn't like it. And I was like, there
Nope.
that's like not really how like things have happened like historically in the United States. Whether you read like a People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, I'm like 70% of the way through it. It's pretty good. I like it. Or an Indigenous people's history. Like there's a lot of things that have happened that kind of like consolidate power within a few people, and to the idea that it would just kind of go away and people would want something more like Biden after the fact of like having that, it's not going to happen. And the same way, like in Michelle Alexander's, like the new Jim Crow, she talks about how like things have changed shape. Like it's the same process. Like it's not slavery and when it became Jim Crow, and then it went from Jim Crow to the prison industrial complex. Like there's
Yes.
these things that have recreated these systems of oppression, and I think that's really important to acknowledge in this because there's just not enough about the outside politics, and that frustrates me a little bit. I know that one comment, I'm still thinking about that hate comment. um I maybe we can
Are
should
you
we give
listening
it
to
some
this
airtime?
episode? Are you listening to this episode, Hate Cometer? Let us know.
Yeah, incredibly shallow application of a contemporary lens to a speculative novel from the 90s. Lauren's fascination with Mars is in large part a spiritual one, yet no attention was given in this review to the religious aspect of the book. I don't
Which
know
you could
what we would be doing with that.
to not to mention
I mean, we
too.
could talk about religion being like the opioid of the masses within like a Marxist sense that like
Yeah.
people cling to that because they don't think they have anything else except for an afterlife. And I think that's really sad and how that is used as a means of control by the economic ruling classes, regardless of like what time like this has been done since there was feudalism, like a means of like subjecting people. I don't think religion is bad. I totally get like why she would, because based on her upbringing, be inclined for a religious view, but I didn't think it was that relevant to
What, especially what
offer an
we're
analysis of. So I'm
talking
doing it
about.
now.
And I think that's interesting too, where they were complaining the fascination with Mars is in a large part a spiritual one. When this book ends and she go like her people go to space. To me,
That
that's
was the
how.
other thing. So I was like, did you read the second book?
So it's not like spiritual at
Hmm.
all though. Like I understand like the idea of like living on like through like your messages that you spend and how you shape the people around you and what you do. Like I understand that like spiritually and stuff. Like I know like I'm not going to live forever and I understand that like in the future the only thing that'll be remembered of me and Mariah will be this podcast, you know? And I think that
That's
like
so deep.
I thank you. But it's also like I don't necessarily think like I never thought that like it I like I understand that it's like a spiritual thing, but it's also it was an end goal for her to get to space and leave the United States. That is objectively what
Yeah, because even
happens.
Bengole is like, do you just mean like hypothetically? She's like, no,
No,
I
like
want
go
to
to
go to space.
space.
I want to go to Mars. Like,
Yeah. And so I'm like,
uh, what was the other half? Oh, comparing the desire to flee to uncertain safety from an apocalyptic world to the liberal discourse around blue and red states felt remarkably petty and insincere. It felt obvious that you wanted this book to be a political tract and not a novel. But it is a deeply political book, and the reason we
yes.
were comparing it to blue and red states is because people do act like if you escape and seek haven, especially after like Roe v. Wade ended and
Yeah.
everything that's happening now with the different states, is that if you go to like Oregon, Washington, California,
Those
things
are
are
safe
you're going to
havens
be
for people.
saved. And now we're having a lot of like white liberals who are like, I'm leaving the country, I'm going to Canada because I'm not
Yeah.
safe. And I do think there is an element of privilege with that. And we should acknowledge that if you're a white settler here, it's kind of your duty to be a little uncomfortable and to fight and to make it better, because likelihood is that your ancestors are the reason that this place is the way it is. And I
Yes.
feel like if you're trying to escape and you're white and you have family that have been here for like hundreds of years, like
That's your
you
responsibility.
you kind of need to have some sort of accountability with that. Like that's I would feel disgusting just up and leaving
No, literally.
just because I was
And
like,
not
oh, I
to
feel unsafe, I'm gonna
mention
go to France.
not to
Or I
mention
don't
like
know.
going to like any of these like places that have like the democratic socialism and stuff like that, like completely ignoring like the exploitation that is still done in the global south that is used to upkeep these other empires. I think to completely ignore that is also doing like a disservice to yourself and to like your understanding of the world. And I just think it's just really weird to me because like, you can't act like the thing is that one thing that was incredibly frustrating with I think Lauren's perspective, especially in the first book, not so much in this one, more like her goal just going to space and stuff. But there is millions of characters that you're introduced to that are just like, oh, I need to go to Canada or I need to go to Alaska because like that's a big thing about like the war and stuff. That Alaska is supposed to be this big safe haven and stuff. And not that we get like whatever like the government ideologies of Alaska is, but I'm imagining if Russia and Canada are backing you, no offense, you're probably not that great of a place either. Like these are not great governments to have in support of you. This is no social. If it was USSR supporting you, okay, maybe you know, but like Alaska is viewed as like the safe haven for people that don't want to fight in the war with the Alaska Christian America War or whatever they were calling it. You know?
Yeah, and this is not even to like even give any like airtime to like the climate crisis, which I don't
Yeah.
know how you felt, but like it kind of in the first book, it was very overt and apparent, and then in
Yes,
this one,
it did
I
get
felt like
sidetracked. It was
it did
more,
get sidetracked, and I thought that was really strange because it was such a big deal with like the wildfire and how they went somewhere with a lake, and like the lake is gone. Um, so that's like part of the reason why she wants to leave Mars is like it's beyond saving, I guess.
but I don't think that's necessary. Like I don't imagine like if like we're comparing it to like America and stuff, like we know that like the science, like obviously like we're in a bad place, like where we are like climate change wise and stuff like that, but acting as if it's unable to be changed is not true. Like scientists have said, like if corporations were to actually stop being so god awful, we actually could come back to at least like a relatively normal like state of being for the planet, but because of capitalism, more than likely that is not going to happen. But also, the only time that I think that like the climate change was relevant to the plot was whenever there was like that landslide that ended up happening because the storm was so big and crazy, where whenever the CA people had taken over Acorn and turned it into like a concentration camp because it freed them because the storm ended up like wiping out the power to their collars, where it just felt like more of like a plot point than it felt like an actual like discussion about it or to
Yeah,
move the
and as
plot
like somebody that
forward.
lives in the Pacific Northwest, like landslides are fairly common. Like there's like landslide seasons. They have like nets when I
Mm-hmm.
drive to like the coast because I live in Southern Oregon, so I want to go to Crescent City, which was like in Humboldt County and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I know this. Like they have these big old nets on the side of these mountains to try to prevent like rocks from falling. Sometimes like we've had like the roads and stuff that have just like slid if it gets too rainy. It's crazy. Like it's a very dangerous place to drive along like that side. And I don't know if that's all climate crisis or if that's just how it's been. It's a
I
very
imagine
like
some of
common
it.
thing. So that's why I didn't make the connection to like climate crisis because I was like, oh, it's like the Pacific
I
Northwest, like
thought
landslides happen.
I thought they became more extreme because of like climate change and stuff. And then also she does talk about in the book because they ripped up the trees and stuff that would have created a more natural barrier for the
Oh yeah,
landslide
yeah,
and
like
stuff
that
too. So
definitely could
that's
have
where I
been, and like
think,
the more the rain and stuff. But I just in my head, like
yeah,
living over here, it was just like, oh, it's a landslide. I don't know.
I from my
I
under I
didn't
think
even
that's,
think.
yeah. Which I mean, but that's because we're just living in that now. You have to remember that, Mariah. Like we're living in like the client crisis right now. So that's probably why it's just like it's becoming the norm for you whenever it shouldn't be such a norm.
This is true. It's my own myopic worldview.
But yeah, I mean, again, I would still recommend this novel. I do think it is a very insightful read. It is a very. I thought it was really interesting too. I sent this to Mariah while I was reading this, which is so crazy because, like, obviously, like I use Facebook sometimes, and so like I'm a part of like different reader Facebook groups and stuff like that. And somebody like posted, "Oh, like just picked up Parable of the Sour. Like, what does everyone think?" And then like everyone's like, "Oh, we love it," which is great. But then somebody's like, "I didn't realize how bad slavery was until I read this book." Like the second one specifically, I'm like,
Yeah,
"What do you
that
mean you
was
didn't know how bad it was?" Like, hello? Like you needed to be like in like the direct path of like somebody describing the absolutely horrific things that one are already in a lot of popular media that does discuss this. If this is like you know what I'm saying, like they make movies talking about this if you don't want to pick up a history book and actually learn about like the horror the horrors of slavery, you know, like there's this has been discussed, you know, and acting like,
yeah, especially since like people like these are like the same. I'm gonna make an assumption here, right? And you know what they say about assuming things, but I
yeah.
think I'm pretty confident. They people always say like, oh, like Handmaid's Tale. Everyone's fucking seen that show, and they're gonna be like, oh, I do think that this is like the better alternative because I think it's a little bit more realistic and it has more like historical relevance to the way that indigenous children were taken away from their parents and they were stripped of their culture and forced to assimilate into like white society. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really relevant to this. So I can see, I think it was the first, but people always say like read Parable of the Sower instead of reading The Handmaid's Tale. And I remember, I think we talked about this in the last one. I was like,
Like
that
I don't
it
see the
doesn't make any
connection.
sense.
But
This
unless
one
they mean the
makes
duology.
more sense. So it maybe, yeah, I was like, they need to be more specific because I read the first one and I was expecting like a Handmaid's Tale esque, like very politically driven novel in that regard. And it's this one. It's this book. This is
Yeah.
this is the book. So like how do you not know that slavery is bad? If like you read Alchemized or you're reading The Handmaid's Tale, like, you're gonna say you don't know how bad slavery was?
I mean, I don't know this person. I don't know what they read or anything. It was just a Facebook comment, but I was just like, what a crazy thing to comment.
I will say, I think one of my favorite things about this book was kind of the relationship dynamic and the analysis that we get to, or not analysis, like it's like the insight that we see between Lauren and her daughter.
Yeah,
I think it's really sad. Like, it being as a parent,
it
I couldn't
is.
imagine having like your child taken away from you, and then to find out not only have they been like raised by somebody else that was terrible to them, but then taken by your family member that has like disowned you and has done like a smear campaign on you,
Yeah, and like
and then
demonized
you meet
you.
them later on and they learn everything about you. You just want to learn about them, and then they still just go back to them. And I thought that was really heartbreaking. It was a very emotional read towards the end,
Yeah, I
and
mean, I think it,
I loved that part. I thought that was such a cool piece, and I'm so glad
well,
that
because
that
I
was
think
in
it,
here because I didn't know if they were going to be together.
like, reunited. Well, because I do think that's such an I do agree that was done really well, because I think it's really interesting because, again, like I talked about how like Lauren's daughter like demonized her all throughout. Larkin, I think is her name. Ashavera, I think is what her like adopted name was or whatever. I do think that was a very strong, because like you never get they never like solve their relationship problems either, and I think that's a very I think that's very satisfying in that way, because it does show that just because you are like being so loving and caring and open, like the way that like these fascists can educate your children and teach them the ways of harm, how sometimes like if you're not able to focus on that, you can't undo it. Especially once they're so old, you know, like people are set in their ways, and I do think that's something that does happen. But I think there are ways to unlearn it, because we do see that happen throughout this novel as well. But then also there are some things that can't be unlearned. And it's not even any fault of like Lauren herself either, because her daughter was taken and stuff, but also like her daughter wanted a much more personal like relationship with her, and she like demonizes Earthseed in that way, and she views it as like an evil, when in reality it has helped more people than it has harmed them. But it's not like she can't see that, because all she sees is the loss of not having a mother in her life because of
Yeah,
the
I wish you
choices
would
her
have
mother made.
realized that like Lauren, it's like a found family trope, like what we would consider now with her and like Harry, like they grew up
Mm-hmm.
together. And I thought that was a really nice in the epilogue
Yes.
moment between the two of them. So like they're both seniors, they've been through so much and they have family and they get to kind of like see this dream that they had wanted come to fruition. Even if I fundamentally disagree with like
It
it
would have
being a means
happened.
of liberation,
Yeah.
it was the story is great. It's very
It's very
touching,
touching.
and I
Yeah.
thought this was so good because I had a really hard time relating to the characters in the first one. This one was just taken to a different degree, and that's why I just think this one's peak. Like, read this one over the other one. You get so much with this. I think treat the first one like a prequel and
Yeah.
treat this one like it's the main dish.
Yeah. I think you definitely could read the first one second, because you do get more insight, because like obviously like there's certain stories about like, and like obviously some of the twists won't be big twists if you read them, because like obviously like the whole thing is that like in the first book Zara sees all of Lawrence brothers die. So then there's like, oh, it turns out Marcus is actually alive. And I think it's so crazy, like the way that Marcus is like a victim of the world, but then also like deeply troubled himself, and the way that like that comes to fruition. I think that is a really interesting character study, and I do think I wish there was more of that, besides of this like I feel like Mark's like character was kind of put like in the background too much, where I think I wish we got more of his writings and stuff, because I do think that could be such an interesting way, because people are always wondering like how like there's so many queer people that are like Trump supporters, and how many like different like marginalized communities that still end up voting for Trump. I mean, there was a big like Hispanic uh like for Trump sort of thing going on, right? And I do think I think that could have pulled in a lot of like the political stuff that we were looking for too, to see like how people fall down that path.
Yes, I feel like that's kind of what Suzanne Collins was trying to do with A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And
Yes.
this, the way it was executed, it made more sense. I felt a lot more
It just need
empathy towards
more.
this character. And it was better. It was
Yes.
better. Like she could write a whole thing where it's just like about a fash. And I think it would be so interesting. And I think you would hate them, but you would understand them better than the way Suzanne Collins did it. And that's like my hot take because I did not like About the Songbirds and Snakes.
Which
That's
isn't
what
a
I want
popular
though.
opinion.
It's something like yeah, it's a relatively unpopular opinion, but that's my opinion. And you know what?
And that's just a theory. Anyways. But yeah, I think that could have been, I think if that was like, even like if that would have been like the topic of the third novel, I think that could have been a really strong third novel. Or even if that was the topic of the first novel, you know, I think that would have made this duology stronger. But I still do recommend this duology. It is a very good duology. If it does, I mean, it is a little utopian and stuff, and that's one thing that's like, it is fiction, you know? Like, that's one thing too.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing
I
where,
think what were you gonna say? Like the type of reader that you would give this to.
I mean, I think any Hunger Games enjoyer would enjoy this, you know? Like, I think it's very much like, because you do follow Lauren most of the time, and I do think she is not quite, like, I think she's a better, like, protagonist than Katniss Everdeen's, because she actually has, like, morals and principles and ideas of her own that she wants to spread, where she's not really a reluctant hero. She is much of, like, the leader of her own journey, and that that's why I think like Hunger Games readers can like it. But I do also think like maybe people that do read lit fic and they don't read science fiction, I do think that this could be a good like transition to that science fiction realm if you're looking to get more into that.
I almost feel like you would get like a Republican to read the first one, and then it would be like a rug pull when they got to the second one.
Yeah, well, because like that's one thing too. Well, because like my grandma called me earlier today, and then she's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm reading a book." And she's like, "Oh, what are you reading?" So then I had to like explain it to her, which without like being too much, but she seemed like really interested in it. So I might get her the first one or something and see if she'd read it, because she like takes all of my recommendations. But she's also a big religious person, so then I'm also like, I don't know how well this would go with you. But she also hates Trump, so it's also like, you know, it's like
She
teetering
might
the line.
respect it to like see like the pastor father dynamic and like a young girl who's like still has like those beliefs, and it's just like her adaptation
Yeah,
of it and how she's able to like transform this like religious viewpoint. So maybe like that's the type of person. That's
yeah.
kind of like where I'm coming from with these books is like, who are we recommending it to? How are we going to use this as a tool? Everything's a tool
Mm-hmm.
for education. That's the point of, like reading is not just like to experience the story, but to have like a deeper
Understanding.
understanding of the themes that are present.
Yes. No, I think. Well, I don't know if you agree or think that anybody. I do think I'm wary to recommend it to like super like religious people, just because like they could see it as like hearsay or whatever they think. But especially like, I don't know if a Trump supporter could read this. Like, I feel like they would see the comparisons and be like, maybe this jerk guy isn't so bad, and then that's like a negative. Like, that would not be good. You know. Like, I think it would have
We'll
to
have to
be
go
like,
through
I
the
think it would
reviews
have
and
to
see
be
if I
like
can find anyone.
I think it would have to be like a conservative anti-Trumper if you were to recommend it to a conservative.
Ooh,
Do you know what I'm saying?
that could be.
I think that would be. I don't think a pro-Trumper could read this, but I do think an anti one could, because they do exist. Believe it or not, y'all. Believe it or not. Ripley's, believe it or not. Anyways, I don't know. Do you have anything
Sorry,
else?
this episode wasn't super organized. We just haven't had a chance to talk about it, and it's kind of hard to completely have it, mocked up and organized. Especially just because there's so much. There's so
Yes.
much, and I didn't know exactly what would fit well in this one. But if somebody doesn't like what we said, feel free to leave a comment, and like
Yeah.
maybe you'll get a spotlight in the next
Yeah, just
episode,
like
and I'll talk
that
about
person
it.
did. Anyways, but I guess if that's everything, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or follow us on Spotify if you haven't already. We have, again, the other episode, Parable is a Sour, we've done. That will be linked in the description below. That is our previous episode. And next week's episode will be The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgkinson. which we are currently reading with our book club. By the time that this is out, we'll have a couple of days still left, about a week or so left in the book club. If you'd like to join, that'll be below. You look like you were going to say something.
No, you got it. I was going to say, like, Parable was one of the books that we did for the book club.
Oh,
So if
yes.
you're interested in reading types of books like this, we're always looking for recommendations. So if you have a book that you want to read, you've heard really great things about it, like the politics are good, you just want, like, some Marxist baddies to talk about it with, join the book club and you can put whatever quotes, you can say whatever you
Yeah,
want. We're always looking for books. I want people to read along with us so that we can
yes.
meet you, our little community, like where you're at and what you want us to review. So
And also on Fable too, it does have that option where you can go and see our past discussion. So you can pull up the Parables of the Sour discussion, even though we're not on that book anymore in our book club on Fable. You can go to that and look through what everyone said throughout the different chapters too. Which I think this one could have been a good book club pick, but I think it's hard doing a separate book for the book club that's like a sequel. So, but if you guys like that, maybe next time we could do like a full duology, like 1 month do the first book, the next month do the second book. That's
I know we were floating the Poppy War. Maybe if somebody really wants it, we could do the trilogy. It would occupy like 3 months, but it's
right.
I know it's something somebody wants.
Yes.
Somebody commented it. So we're trying to slot it in for
we'll
next
definitely
year.
slot in at least the first book for the book club for sure. We'll put it up on a poll if it wins, if it doesn't win. I think they were mostly asking for just any episode from us as well. So, but other than that, thanks for listening and thank you and good night.